blame of genocidal tendencies or anything to that effect?
Well, I'm not sure that they would argue that it's genocide. They would argue that the remaining Tamil population of at least 160,000 or more in areas occupied or controlled by the government is satisfactory, and there's no genocide going on there. I think you'll find that Tamil, I know expert will say that the circumstances under which Tamil areas which are government controlled, the circumstances for the local Tamil population are very harsh. It's said that anyone who's been involved with the Tigers, so if people do come out, that they're then put in camps of various sorts, and that the conditions under which the Tamil population is living in Sri Lanka, in areas controlled by the government, is very unsatisfactory.
But Sir Hugo, is it not true that the people, some estimate around 150 to 250,000, although the official record announced by the government is much less than that, have been trapped there and they have nowhere to go? They're basically stranded in the jungles. Now, is it not true that the government might have been slightly blinded by the huge international support of it, finally claiming to defeat the LTTE, that it is kind of turning a blind eye on the humanitarian aspect, because it could easily open a corridor, a safe corridor for safe conduct and passage of the people if it wanted to?
Yes, it could. There are a number of, but the argument is that a lot of people will say the people actually are staying there voluntarily. Of course, if the people are being held as hostages, as is claimed by the British and most of the Western press, then that makes the treatment of them even harsher. But you make another interesting point, which is actually, yes, it is surprising. The Tamils have very few international friends, also have very little international coverage. On the other hand, they have been fighting a resistance movement, a liberation movement for a very long time. So, and I don't see an immediate solution to it, even if there is a short-term victory.
Jen, do you agree that the people reportedly and apparently trapped there in that northeastern territory are there out of their own will and volition?
Absolutely. I think the government's claims are laughable. If the government had genuine intent and genuine goodwill towards the people, it would not have needed to expel the UN prior to the war even starting. So the government's claims are completely ridiculous. And I cannot see how anyone with common sense could take the view that the government is incentivizing people to leave. I just heard stories the other day that there were 18 people who left in this 2-day ceasefire that the international community has called for. And those 18 people were asked to strip naked outside the camps for searching and made to walk into the IDP camps stark naked. It's ridiculous. They're obviously not incentivizing anyone to go anywhere. So I think that the facade that people are being held as hostages is ridiculous, and they've made no attempt to try and guarantee people freedom of movement, freedom from torture, any of the Geneva Conventions.
You speak of incentives. I mean, what does it really take as an incentive? I mean, just imagine the people are trapped there in the war zone in the midst of a crossfire.
Let me put it to you.
I mean, it's just beyond having any incentives.
Yes.
It's just...
No, I agree completely. The word incentive was used ironically. The point is the incentive, if there was one, is to not be killed by chemical bombs and cluster bombs in the area. So that is what I suppose the government hopes is incentive on the one side.
Protection for the civilians trapped there.
Well, it's not exactly protection if you're tortured in camps and you're held without any sort of Geneva Convention rights that are accorded to human beings under normal circumstances. What the government is doing is introducing a two-tier society, very much like the Americans did, for example, pre their Civil War. Of course, you know, there's a constitutional right to the pursuit of freedom and freedom of movement and all of those things, but it doesn't apply to the Tamil people. That is why we say this is a war that is about race and that it is a genocidal war. I do want to clarify one point about the genocide point. That our position is not that this act alone is genocide. We think that it is, that it matches the Srebrenica definition of genocide, but we say that there has been a long-running, ongoing genocide. In fact, the very first act of non-violent ethnic cleansing was back in 1948, when a third of the Tamil people were deprived of citizenship. So the first step was done through laws, very much like the Nazis did. The Nazi genocide was carried out initially through legal mechanisms. The Jewish people were stripped of citizenship in Nazi Germany. So
John, let me come back to you in just a bit. I think we're drifting a little bit from the main theme. Now, another guest just joining us on the phone from Sri Lanka, from Kandy, is Mr. Kehelia Rambakwela. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Rambakwela. Now, we're discussing the latest situation in terms of the so-called defeat of the LTT in your country. Now, does the fall and collapse of Kilinachi, basically the de facto capital of the rebels in late last year, necessarily mean the end of the separatist movements there?
Well, if I hear you right, I think asking me about the liberation operation that was carried out within the last few months. And
no,
then
as a matter of fact, sir, the Kaheli, I was